Hi folks, welcome to this lecture on test-taking skills. So again, another really important topic in our course. Why don't I just jump right into it? So a lot of people have test anxiety, and the reading for this unit is somewhere around 40% of people, with somewhere around 20% of people having severe test anxiety. And so I want to say some things about that first. So first of all, most issues with test anxiety can be resolved by practicing good study habits and good test-taking strategies. And so, most of this lecture is going to go through some of these things. And if you're not doing all these things the way that they're laid out here, then that's kind of like the way to diagnose the problem to begin with. However, it's also true, and I've had anxiety problems in my own life. Many people have problems with anxiety at one time or another. I don't mean to downplay the reality of anxiety, because I definitely know that it's a real thing. But most test anxiety issues can be resolved by practicing good academic habits. However, if you think you have anxiety problems in general, then I can't do much for you because I'm not a counselor. And so that's when you might want to get in touch with a counseling center or another professional. And so I'd say, if you still think you're having severe test anxiety, even when you're doing all these things that I'm going to mention, then that would be a good time to go seek out some form of professional guidance for your anxiety. And so, I'm not going to veer into counseling territory. I'm not qualified to do that. What I will do is go through some of the things you can do before, checking into professional help. So the first thing is pretty simple. We talked about study habits last week. We talked about learning a couple weeks ago. And so, if you're not practicing good study habits and you're really anxious on test day, the reason why you're really anxious is probably because in your heart of hearts, you know that you're not well prepared. So step number one, you got to be well prepared. And so again, just to review what we talked about last week, you've got to go to class, every class. You've got to do your best to take part in lectures, take notes, ask questions, so on and so forth. Collect everything that you need, collect all the materials. Then before you start studying for the test, it's really important to organize all your study materials into some kind of study guides. Depending on the class and depending on your learning style, those study guides might be different. And then you've got to manage your time, and you've got to have a distributed study schedule. You've got to have plenty of time to study. You should break up your studying into many shorter sessions when possible. You want to give yourself at least a week. And really importantly, and I'll talk about this in more detail later, you do not want to cram the night before, and you really, really, really do not want to stay up all night the night before. Those are surefire ways to do poorly on tests. So step number one, good study habits. If you're having test anxiety, you don't have good study habits, then we can diagnose the problem there. And the first thing to do is to practice good study habits. So number two, be physically and emotionally prepared. So if you're well prepared from a studying point of view, the next thing to do is to be physically well prepared, because, taking tests is a physical thing you have to do, and so you've got to be prepared. So how can you do that? Pretty simple things. Get a good night's sleep and eat a meal before the test. So we know our brains literally do not work when we're tired. If you've ever been overtired, and I'm sure you have been, you could corroborate that fact. Our brains also don't work well when we're hungry. And so if you are not well rested and you're hungry, then you're probably going to not do very well on the test. So those are pretty quick fixes. Go to bed early the night before, eat a good breakfast before the test. And this kind of goes into the cramming thing. And so a lot of students, starting out, they don't manage their time well, so they end up cramming the night before. They think that pulling an all-nighter is going to be a great way to make up for the lost time. Unfortunately, we know, from research, this does not work. It just doesn't work. Our brain cannot retain information very well by cramming. And again, our brains don't work well when we're tired. So cramming all-nighters, it just doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And finally, being emotionally prepared. Get to class early. Don't rush in. Don't come in late. Because then when you come in late, you're anxious. If there's one day you really want to get to class early, it's test day. Get there early, review your notes the final time, take some deep breaths, maybe if you meditate or what have you. That's a good way to get rid of a little bit of anxiety that could come up by being late or what have you. And so in terms of the nuts and bolts of taking the test, memory cues. So if there's any memory tricks, like we talked about this when we talked about study skills, acronyms, this kind of thing, or if you have to remember formulas or whatever. It depends on the test and so on, but often, you have to memorize certain things. And if, as soon as you sit down, if you start to write down the things that you need to memorize, or if you write down your memory cues, whether they're acronyms or what have you, that can be good because that gets some anxiety off your back. If you write those things down, then you don't have to worry about remembering them later. So that can be a good strategy. I remember doing that very often with formulas and that kind of thing. And so, again, nuts and bolts to take the test. So this is something you may not have done before. And if you haven't done it, it's a really important thing to do. When you get a test, you want to make a plan. And oftentimes, professors will tell you beforehand kind of what the format of the test will be. Sometimes they won't. But either way, when you get the test, you want to see what's on there and make a plan on how you're going to attack it. And this is important for a lot of reasons. So you want to see which sections are on there. You want to be aware of how many points each section is worth. You want to be aware of how much time you have. And then you want to make a plan based on all these things for the most kind of reasonable way to attack the test. And so essentially you're trying to make sure you have enough time to do the sections that are worth the most points. And, unless your professor tells you otherwise, it could be possible that you could skip ahead and do a section that's at the end of the test that maybe is worth more points before you do ones that are at the beginning of the test that are worth less points. So you want to be strategic and you want to be smart about how you're going about taking the test. So for an example here, if you have an hour and 15 minutes, you have 25 true-false questions worth 1 point each, 25 multiple choice questions worth 1 point each, and 2 essay questions worth 25 points each. It's pretty clear that the essay questions are worth the most, and they're probably going to take the most amount of time as well. So it might be a good strategy to take those essay questions first. But no matter which way you do it, you're going to want to budget your time. And so, for example, you have an hour and 15 minutes. I might say to myself, I really can't spend more than 15 minutes on the true and false. I really can't spend more than 15 minutes on the multiple choice because I've got to give myself at least 45 minutes to do these 2 essay questions. And so you want to, budget your time, look at the clock, and be smart about how you're allocating time to different parts of the test. Because, that's going to make a big impact on how you ultimately do. And often people might not, think about these kinds of things. And it's really important to think about these things. So spend time in proportion to the points available, number one. And number two, really important, so don't get bogged down with questions that are hard. Because, if you have one true-false question that's worth 1 point, you might not know the answer. It doesn't make any sense for you to spend 10 minutes thinking about it. Just skip it. So if a question is really hard, especially if it's not worth that many points, just skip it and you can go back later. You kind of want to, depending on, how much time you have, you might need to really budget your time carefully, which means you want to get as many points as you can get before the time runs out, which means you want to answer the questions first. You don't want to get bogged down on questions that you're really having trouble with, especially if they're not worth too many points. So, you can almost think of it as a game. I think people who are good test takers, they think of it as a game. The game is, I'm going to try to get as many points as I can here. I'm going to be as smart as I can about the way I'm taking this test. I'm going to, make sure I get the points on the ones I know by answering the ones I know, skipping the ones that are hard. And then if I have time at the end, I'll go back to the ones that are hard and I'll do my best, But the idea, make sure to get the points that you can get first, and then go back later on to work on the ones that were hard. And, this gives you confidence because you're answering the ones you know. And it also lets you know that you're putting points in the bank. Putting points in the bank with the questions takes pressure off. On the other hand, if you're bogged down, if the first question is really hard and it's only worth 1 point and you spend 20 minutes on it, the rest of the test, you're going to be completely anxious because you probably know that was a bad idea. So answer those easy questions, put points in the bank, think of it as a game. You're trying to put as many points in the bank as quickly as you can, and budget your time carefully. So some more tips on the nuts and bolts. So process of elimination, unless you're told that you lose points for wrong answers, like don't leave anything blank. If you have a multiple choice question, why wouldn't you guess? When I give tests, I have students who literally leave multiple choices blank, leave fill in the blank, or blank, leave matching blank when there's no penalty for wrong answers. So, when in doubt, guess, unless there's a penalty for wrong guesses. On different multiple choice questions or on matching questions or this kind of thing, you can eliminate answers you know are wrong. So you might be torn between 1 or 2 or 3 answers, but if you know one is completely wrong, then just cross it off, and then you increase your chances of guessing correctly. And then with essay questions, so it could be you get an essay question and you might not completely know exactly what's being asked, but you might know a lot about the topic in general. So generally, most professors are going to give you partial credit for putting down what you do know. So you always want to put down what you do know. If you have short answers, if you have essays, give them everything you got. Give them everything you got, and most people are going to give you some partial credit. Don't freak out. And sometimes you can even spin the question in your own direction so that you can, highlight the things you do know. So you really want to avoid leaving essays blank because essays are probably going to be worth a significant amount of points. Put down what you know, and most people are going to be kind and at least give you some partial credit for demonstrating that you know some things. So short answers and essays, really important that you read the prompt and read directions. That's another general thing about test taking, reading the directions very carefully. And so sometimes people skip over the directions, especially with essay questions. And the directions are incredibly important, right? And so that can cause major problems. The readings go into more detail with this. But with essays, it's especially important that you understand what you're being asked to do. Same is true every time you get a writing assignment of any kind. But some of the key terms people might use in essays: analyze, compare, contrast, define, describe, explain the causes, explain the effects, explain the process, evaluate, explain, illustrate, summarize. So, all these things are asking you to do different things. And so you want to pay close attention to what you're being asked to do to make sure you're actually doing what you're being asked to do. Because if you're not doing what you're being asked to do, then, people can't give you many points because you haven't done what you're being asked to do. And often with essays, people will be kind and they'll give you a choice. And so obviously you want to think carefully about which prompt you're choosing. And you obviously want to choose the prompt that you think you've got the most to say about, the one you feel most comfortable writing about. And so with essays, unlike an essay for a normal class, you don't have an unlimited amount of time to do it. You have a very limited amount of time to do it. But it's still good to try to go through the writing process, even if it's in an abbreviated way. So you at least want to brainstorm your ideas first. Maybe have a very simple outline where you just have a general idea of kind of what each paragraph might be about. That'll help you stay organized, and it'll take some of that anxiety off your shoulders. Again, if you write a short outline, a short brainstorm, that way the ideas are there, and then when you're writing the essay, you're kind of just elaborating on the ideas rather than coming up with them out of the blue, which is always an important thing when you're writing anything. And then, you can turn around the question or topic for short answers in essays. And so, for example, if the question was, why are neoliberal values toxic, then you could just start the essay or the answer by saying, neoliberal values are toxic because, and that way you know that you're answering exactly what you're being asked. So try to go through the writing process in an abbreviated form, because it's going to help you be organized, and it'll help you take off some of that anxiety. So, the readings for this week go into more detail, but here's a summary of everything I've just said. If you're having test anxiety, if you're having any other test-taking troubles, the first thing to do to diagnose the problem is to ask yourself if you're practicing good study habits. If you're not practicing good study habits, then it stands to reason that your test problems are really a study habit problem. And so start by making sure you have good study habits. Number 2, make sure that you're physically and emotionally prepared. No all-nighters, no cramming the night before. I mean, obviously you're going to study the night before, but don't stay up all night the night before cramming. We know that doesn't work. It literally doesn't work. We know. Make sure to have breakfast. Make sure to get there early so you're not anxious about being late. Preview the test to make a plan. Get an overview of everything on there. Make a plan based on how many points everything is worth and how much time you have. Number 4, don't get stuck. Put points in the bank by answering the questions first. Skip the difficult questions. You could also, guess, but, mark them down so you might want to revisit those if you have time. Unless that is, you're being penalized for wrong answers. But I think most tests don't work that way in college. But you might want to be clear about that. Yeah, so don't get stuck. Getting stuck increases your anxiety. Answering the questions decreases your anxiety. So you want to answer the questions first. Go back to the ones that are hard later. Don't leave blanks. Guess if you don't know, unless you're penalized for wrong answers. It always baffles me that students leave things blank. If you have 4 or 5 choices and you choose one, you've got a fair chance of guessing right. So why not take a guess? Number 6, make sure to understand prompts and directions for essays. And I'd also say, make sure you understand the directions for each section. This often happens in college tests, college assignments in general. Students skip over the instructions and they're not clear about what they're being asked to do. Especially important for essays. And also for essays, again, go through the writing process to the greatest degree that it's possible, because, again, that's going to help you organize your ideas, and it'll take a little bit of that anxiety off your shoulders as you're sitting down to write that essay. So I think that covers it. The readings for this week and next go into a bit more detail, but and again, if you're doing all these things and you're still having severe test anxiety, there's not much more I can do for you because I'm not a counselor. But that might be a good time to see the counseling center and to maybe seek out some kind of professional guidance about anxiety, because anxiety is real. I don't want to make it sound like anxiety is not real, but for most students, test anxiety is caused by some combination of these factors, whether it's study habits or test-taking strategies. So I'll end it there. Good luck with all your tests in the future.